All right, we've made it to our final tutorial, or at least the final tutorial on creating the account API with Go. And while the API endpoints may seem basic, I think that we went into some real ugly details that you might not see covered in other tutorials. So just let me toot my own horn. Yes, some things were wrong. No, not everything was perfect, but we covered a lot of important topics here. As I've reworked this application, I have found some problems and areas to improve the repository. There's some funny naming, like suffixing the names of our repositories with repository, like calling this user repository when it's already in the repository layer, though there's some argument for that to recognize what you're naming and what you're instantiating. I also gloss over some of the necessary test case in the unit test, and there are clearly some other mistakes here. Nevertheless, I'm pretty dang pleased with the application, and I hope you've enjoyed working on it as well. After this, I may take a short break, may not, who knows, but then we'll get working on the front-end view application that can work with this API. Today, we'll create this delete handler on the image path. We'll need to add a delete profile method to the image repository, which will delete the files inside of Google Cloud Storage. We'll also need to add a user service clear profile image method, which will reach out to the image and user repositories. And it will reach out to this delete profile method in the image repository, and then it will reuse the update image method that we previously created to basically set the image in Postgres as an empty string. As I explained last time, we're not really using null in Postgres. I didn't want to go into that depth, so we'll just set the image to an empty string. Okay, after that preface, let's add method signatures to our interfaces or our interface for deleting an image. Let's go to the model layer, interfaces, as always. And the first interface I want to add is in the user service, and this method will be called clearImage. And actually, it will be called clearProfileImage. It will take the context as always, and it needs to know who the user is so that we can delete that user's image. If there's an error, we will return it. While we're at it, let's add a second method to the image repository here. And this method will be that delete profile method that we had shown previously. And it will just take the cloud storage object's name or the last part of the URL path and attempt to delete it. If there's an error, we'll get it back. I'm glad to see that my Go tools seem to be working and catching all the errors now. Before, it was only catching an error, and then it wouldn't catch future errors. It would only catch the first occurrence of an error it found, so that's good. Although it looks more scary because we get 19 problems instead of 3 here. Let's first update our mocks and our user service mock, more specifically, to have the clear profile image method. I will add at the top. These aren't strictly in alphabetical order, but I guess they're close. And this mock will be dead simple because this method only returns an error. We call the function with the context and UID, and then we make sure we cast the error. And I left the comment off here. Very well. Let's also add our delete profile method to the image repository as a mock here. And whoop, there it is. Basically the same thing as the last one, except that we're passing in an object name to the mock.called method. Let's save this. And now we just need to work on our Google Cloud image repository and our application's concrete implementation of the user service. So let's go to our service folder here. And yes, our tools are working much better now, highlighting what's wrong. And we need to add clear profile image to this user service. Let's go down below the factory here. And I've actually looked at these factories. I think we should probably do some sort of checking to make sure all of the values are included in the factory, to make sure we actually don't have nil values for these. Otherwise, it kind of defeats the purpose of having them. But I'm learning. And you would say, well, then what do we do in the unit test? Because in the unit test, we don't want all of these. Well, the unit tests are package private, so the user test could just use the struct directly. Anyway, something to improve on in your next application and my next application. But I digress. Here is the clear profile image method. First, we're going to look at the user repository to get the user, meaning we want the up-to-date user, and we don't want to just rely on the tokens user data. If there's an error, we'll forward that error down to the handler. If there's not any image URL in the findByID's user, then we will just return nil. We don't need to update anything because the user has no image to delete. Then we want to get the object name or the last part of the path from the URL that was in the database. And this is that method we created last time, object name for URL. That method is at the very bottom, and basically it boils down to getting the last part of the URL path with the path.base method. Let us scroll back up. Then all we do is reach out to the image repository to delete the profile image. We check for any errors, and lastly we will update the image column with the user repository update image method, and make sure to pass in the quotes because we're using an empty string for no image. And again, we check for an error and forward it down to the handler if there is an error. Otherwise, we return nil. Now, I don't know if maybe there's a better way to only reach out to Postgres one time while also deleting the image in Google Cloud, so we don't have to make multiple calls, but I am not an advanced Postgres user. So if you do know, go ahead and let me know. And we now have this glaring red file here, and so we need to add our delete profile method to the image repository. This will be pretty simple. So we receive the context and the object name as parameters. We have the bucket as part of R, which is the repository struct. So we get the bucket handle, then from that we create an object handle with bucket.object, and then we get that name, which we stripped off of the URL in the user service. And then we call object.delete. It's not quite as complex to write a file, it's not quite as complex to delete a file as it is to write a file. If we get any error, I'll log this for internal usage, and otherwise, and also, return app errors.newInternal. I'm starting to apologize a lot. I'm starting to sound like Lee Holiday. Sorry, Canadians, you're great. All right, and if there are no errors, we return nil. All right, so now, like always, when we create a handler, first of all, let me save the user service. When we create a handler, we create a new file for it. You don't have to do it this way. I guess I could break out the user service files into a separate package too. There are lots of opinions or ways you could do this, and not _go, but .go. Let's create this file. And the first thing we want to do is call it package handler, and then go into the handler file and cut this final handler out of handler. We'll save that and add it into the delete image file here. We save and do some auto imports. I don't know why this guy still can't find that method. All right, something went wrong with the Go language tools there. I just restarted them, and now suddenly the handler here will suddenly find this delete image. And I guess I hadn't saved the file either. That might have been the problem. Okay, this handler, if we go back to handler.go, remember how we're handling our handlers handling our handlers. Isn't that cute? All right, we're handling our handlers that require auth inside of this test mode block, because in test mode, we do not want to use the middleware, so that we isolate the middleware's functionality from the unit test. So if we're in test mode, that's this else block. We'll just call the delete image handler directly. And if we are in like dev or prod mode, we want to use the auth user middleware. Probably you should do some sort of integration test with these two. And I'm going to do something I hate that other people do. I'm going to say that is beyond the scope of this course. And when they say that, I just nod my head and I glower at them. Shame. Okay, let's go back to the delete image handler. I'm kind of a dork. All right. This is going to be easy peasy. And then I'll do my auto imports as always. And we're going to extract the authorized user from that middleware by using gen's must get method on the user key. We extract the request context and call clear profile image, which was the service method we just worked on. We check for any errors. If there's an error, we'll use apperrors.status to see if it is an app error, or if it's not an app error, we just send a 500 error, I think. And then otherwise, we will return a message success, which again could be redundant as we're already returning a status okay. All right, here comes the moment of truth. Let's change directories, not comma, comma. Let's change directories up one, and let's run docker compose up. After this gets started up, I'm going to open pgadmin, and we're going to go through the whole flow of creating a user or deleting their image. In fact, we probably don't need to create the image as we did that last time. All right, everything's up and running. Let's go to pgadmin. I'm going to open this users table by just doing it this way instead of writing the query. And we were working with guy01 last time. Let's continue to do that. You see that they currently have a profile image with an ID that ends in C8ED. And last time I forgot to increase the size here. It's still pretty small text, so sorry if you can't see that, but it ends in 2C8D. I will now go to Google Cloud and we'll make sure that this 2C8D ID is in the storage still. All right, I'm in our bucket, and here is 2C8ED. All right, there's our image. Let's give it a go deleting it. I'm in Postman, and I've created a delete handler on the API account image endpoint. Remember, API account is our base URL. And we don't really need a body here. And I don't know that the type matters either, as we're just deleting. Authorization does matter. I have not updated this token, so hopefully if we send this, we should get an auth error. And let's sign in. Excellent, we should now have an ID token. And let's go to image, and let's try to delete theirs. Success! And status 200. Let's actually check both Postgres and Google Cloud. All right, here is that image. Let's refresh. And it's gone. Good. And then let's refresh this database here and click play. All right, looks good. Empty string. Well, folks, we done got ourselves a completed user account and authentication API, or at least one that's good enough for a demo tutorial. I hope all two of you who watched this series are proud of yourselves for hanging in there. After a small break, we'll get working on a client application that we're going to build with Vue 3 that will work with this API. Thanks so much for joining. Tell your other web dev nerd friends about this channel and give it a like. Hasta el próximo video. Nos vemos.